Harlan stepped quietly into the dimly lit restaurant dressed in a simple employee uniform blending into the shadows. The air was heavy, almost stagnant, carrying a subtle chill that seemed to seep into his bones. Empty tables stretched before him, their surfaces reflecting the dull glow of yellow overhead lights. The staff moved mechanically, their motions slow, detached like ghosts haunting the space. He slid into a booth, letting his shoulders relax just enough to observe, and ordered Texas chili. While waiting, his eyes were drawn to the small kitchen window. He watched the cooks, noting each hurried glance, each precise yet secretive movement. Something felt off, an undercurrent of unease he couldn't yet name. The normal bustle of a restaurant was absent, replaced by a quiet tension that made him instinctively lean forward, gripping the edge of the table. Harlan's suspicion grew with every passing second, a silent alarm that hinted at hidden truths lurking just beyond the glass. This wasn't just dinner, it was the start of an investigation into what was really happening inside. Harlan's meal arrived with a soft clink of plates, but his appetite had already soured. The Texas chili in front of him didn't look like the dish he had expected. The color was off, a strange, unappetizing hue that seemed to drain the warmth from the very idea of comfort food. He picked up his spoon, but something didn't sit right. His eyes moved instinctively toward the kitchen window, a sliver of glass between him and the staff. Through the small pane, he saw a figure in the kitchen. One of the cooks was hunched over the pot, silently adding a scoop of powder into the bubbling stew. The realization hit him like a cold gust of wind. This wasn't beef, this was something else entirely. The meal, once so familiar, now seemed foreign, a parody of the dish he had known. A wave of unease washed over him as his mind raced, piecing together fragments of the unsettling atmosphere he had sensed earlier. This wasn't a mistake. It was something deliberate, and this was not the first time he had felt that nagging discomfort. His fingers tightened around his spoon, his pulse quickening as the room around him seemed to close in. This wasn't just bad food. This was something more, something deeply wrong. Harlan's unease deepened as he continued to observe the kitchen, his focus unbroken. The kitchen staff moved with a strange rhythm, their actions careful, almost secretive. The air between them was thick with an unspoken tension that was impossible to ignore. One of the cooks glanced over at his colleague, their eyes locking for a split second. It was brief, but enough for Harlan to catch the fleeting flicker of discomfort. There was something off in the way they moved, in the way their glances passed between them with purpose and anxiety. The seamless coordination of their tasks appeared almost too practiced, as though they were hiding something behind the routine. Harlan's gaze remained fixed on them, his thoughts racing as the situation unfolded in front of him. The chili, the strange ingredients, the suppressed interactions between the workers, he could feel the tension settling like a weight in his chest. It was more than just a poorly executed meal. It felt like a carefully orchestrated performance meant to conceal the truth. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, his mind fighting the urge to confront them. Instead, he continued to watch, trying to make sense of the growing unease that gnawed at him. Something was definitely wrong, but the pieces of the puzzle refused to align. Unable to shake the unease creeping through his veins, Harlan made a decision he would order another dish. Maybe it was a small risk, but he needed to confirm his suspicions. A bowl of soup was brought to him, yet another seemingly simple dish. This time, he paid even closer attention, his eyes scanning the preparation process through the small opening in the kitchen. As the soup was being ladled into a bowl, Harlan noted the dull, lifeless vegetables floating in the broth. The carrots were limp, the greens limp and brown at the edges, and the chicken, if it could even be called that, looked more like it had been sitting for days than freshly cooked. His stomach twisted. The ingredients weren't just subpar, they were far past their prime. This wasn't the casual mistake of an overworked kitchen. It was something more deliberate. The slow realization gnawed at him. His senses were no longer on alert, they were now screaming. What kind of place was this? The creeping dread he had felt earlier was now impossible to ignore as he considered how much worse this could get. His grip on the edge of the table tightened as if anchoring himself against the wave of discomfort crashing through him. The gap between his expectations and the grim reality of what he was witnessing was becoming more and more impossible to ignore. The restaurant was a far cry from what it had once been, and Harlan had now seen enough to know that something far darker was at play beneath its surface. Harlan knew he couldn't sit idly by anymore. He had to see it for himself. Quietly slipping through the back door of the kitchen, he made his way toward the preparation area, his eyes scanning the space with an intensity he hadn't felt before. The clatter of pots and pans blended with the hurried voices of the staff, but he couldn't focus on anything but the large pot simmering in the corner. His gaze locked onto a cook who was pouring a generous amount of powder into the bubbling chili. The sight was unmistakable. This was no ordinary spice blend. It was a mixture meant to mimic beef, not a freshly prepared meal. The thought of it made Harlan's stomach turn. His suspicions had been right all along. This wasn't just a kitchen mistake. It was deliberate. His mind raced as he tried to grasp the magnitude of what he was seeing. He had crossed the line from disbelief to disgust. This was no longer just about bad food. It was about deceit. The truth, cold and clear, was now before him, and all he could feel was a sense of helplessness mixed with a deep-seated anger. The betrayal was palpable in the air, and as he stood there watching the manipulation unfold, he knew things were about to get much worse. Harlan couldn't hold back any longer. He moved forward, stepping into the open, his voice cutting through the silence. "What's the process for making the Texas chili here?" he asked, his eyes fixed on one of the cooks. The cook froze, the ladle in his hand, stilled midair. For a split second, there was a hesitation, a flicker of unease in the cook's eyes. He looked away quickly, unwilling to meet Harlan's gaze. The tension was thick enough to slice through. The cook muttered something incoherent, avoiding any direct answers. The awkward silence between them grew every second, stretching into eternity. Harlan could see it now. There was something they were hiding. The discomfort in the air was unmistakable. The cook shifted uneasily, his body language screaming of guilt. Harlan's suspicions were no longer just thoughts in his head, they had transformed into a cold certainty. As the cook continued to squirm, Harlan's stomach twisted with frustration. It was clear the truth was being buried under layers of lies. There was no doubt left. The lack of transparency in the kitchen was intentional, and it was time for Harlan to dig deeper. Harlan's patience was wearing thin. He pressed further, his voice now firm, demanding the truth. "Tell me, why are we using powder instead of real beef?" "This isn't the standard procedure." Several of the other kitchen staff who had been watching from the sidelines shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a younger man with a nervous twitch, finally spoke up. "This is how we've been told to do it. Management instructed us to use the powder. It's cheaper, faster, and—" "It works," he stammered. Harlan's jaw clenched at the response. "That's not an answer," he replied, his voice low-cold. The young man looked away, his eyes darting around the kitchen, clearly wanting to retreat, but unable to. The revelation struck Harlan like a blow to the gut. The rot went deeper than he had anticipated. This wasn't just a mistake made by a few careless cooks. This was something far more systematic, a corporate decision to cut corners at the cost of quality and honesty. Disappointment flooded over him as he realized that the issue was much bigger than he had first thought. His decision was clear now. He had to confront the manager. The facade was crumbling, and the truth was staring him in the face. His frustration was now palpable, the weight of betrayal heavier than ever before. Harlan stepped into the manager's office, his resolve hardening with each step. The confrontation that had been brewing for hours finally reached its breaking point. "I need you to explain the process." Harlan said, his voice cold. The manager, however, seemed unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, a calm smile on his face. "It's simple," he replied. "We use the spice mix to save on costs. It's cheaper, and the customers can't tell the difference. The quality is still there." Harlan's fists clenched at his sides. He could feel the tension rising, the words hanging between them like a heavy weight. This wasn't about quality. It was about deception. "But that's not the point." Harlan pressed his voice, rising slightly. "You're lying to the customers. This isn't the chili they think they're getting." The manager's casual demeanor didn't waver, but Harlan could see the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The excuses, the justifications, they weren't enough. They never would be. "You can't keep using these cheap substitutes," Harlan said, his voice sharper now. The manager's easy smile remained, but Harlan wasn't convinced. There was no justification that could change the fact that they were cheating their customers, and that was something he could never accept. Determined to uncover the full extent of the deception, Harlan took matters into his own hands. He slipped through the back door of the kitchen, moving quietly as he approached the storage area. The shelves were stocked with boxes and bags, but something felt wrong. As he dug deeper into the corner, he found it bags of spice mix stacked where fresh meat should have been. The discovery hit him like a punch to the gut. The labels on the boxes confirmed his worst fear. The fresh ingredients had been replaced with cheap substitutes. The sight of expired meat untouched for what must have been days sent a shiver down his spine. Harlan couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that settled in his chest. This wasn't just cost-cutting. This was a deliberate act of dishonesty, a betrayal that went deeper than he had imagined. As his eyes scanned the room, he realized that the truth was right in front of him, hidden in plain sight. But the worst part was he had been blind to it until now. The thought of it made his stomach churn, but there was no turning back now. He had to confront this no matter the cost. Harlan stormed back into the manager's office. His fists clenched, his heart pounding in his chest. The discovery in the storage room weighed heavily on him, and he wasn't about to let it slide. "I checked the stock," Harlan began, his tone clipped. "The meat is expired, and there's nothing fresh in the kitchen. The spices are being used to replace real ingredients." The manager's face faltered for a moment, his eyes darting to the side as he fumbled for a response. "It's the suppliers," he muttered quickly. "They sent us bad stock. I've already contacted them." But Harlan wasn't buying it. The manager's attempts to deflect felt hollow, his excuses strained. "You're telling me the entire kitchen is operating on subpar ingredients because the suppliers made a mistake?" Harlan's voice was cold, unforgiving. The manager shifted in his seat, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he tried to maintain his composure. The defensiveness was transparent, and the weight of the lie was becoming harder to ignore. Harlan could see the cracks in his demeanor. He had been lying about everything. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was the disgust that ran deeper. He had to act now. This wasn't a small issue. It was a breach of trust that threatened everything the restaurant stood for. Harlan knew he couldn't let this go any longer. Harlan stepped out of the kitchen, the weight of what he had just discovered pressing down on him. The decision was made, there would be no more waiting. He found a quiet corner of the restaurant and gathered the staff, his face unreadable. The usual buzz of chatter faltered as the employees began to gather, their expressions wary. They didn't know what to expect, but the sudden seriousness in Harlan's tone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the group. They stood in silence, exchanging glances, unsure whether they were about to face praise or reprimand. Harlan cleared his throat and spoke. "We're having a meeting. Soon. Things need to change around here, and we need to talk about it." His words were firm, but there was a sense of something unspoken lurking behind them. As he turned away, a subtle chill spread among the group. They had no idea who he really was, but their unease was palpable. Harlan's mind raced ahead. The meeting was not just about what had been discovered, it was about taking control of what would come next. What started as an investigation was now a mission to reshape everything. The uncertainty in their eyes mirrored the tension he felt inside. This was only the beginning of something far bigger than they realized. The day of the meeting arrived, and the atmosphere was tense. Employees shuffled into the room, their nervous chatter dying down as they took their seats. Harlan stood at the front, a calmness about him that contrasted with the unease in the room. The door clicked shut, and all eyes were on him. He didn't waste time. "I know what's been happening," Harlan began, his voice steady. "I've seen it all, the shortcuts, the lies, the deceit. And now it's time to change." A murmur rippled through the room, but Harlan silenced it with a raised hand. "I'm not just someone who's heard rumors. I've been here working with you, and I know exactly what's been going on." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. "I'm your boss." The room fell silent. The shock on the employees' faces was instant, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. They had no idea. Harlan had been with them the whole time, watching, learning, preparing for this moment. The confusion, the disbelief, it was all written on their faces. But the truth was out, and everything they thought they knew was about to change. The silence in the room lingered as Harlan's revelation sank in. Slowly, he began to speak again, his tone softer but resolute. "Now that you know who I am, it's time to talk about what comes next. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to fix what's broken. And it starts with us." He motioned to the room, his gaze sweeping over the employees. "We're going to improve everything from the ingredients we use to how we work together as a team. Quality will be our priority. Integrity will be our foundation." He let his words hang in the air, not rushing them, letting them settle into the hearts of those listening. "I know change isn't easy, but we can do it. We have to do it. For our customers, for each other, for the restaurant." The room was still the employees absorbing what he was saying. For some, it was a daunting prospect. For others, a lifeline. But as Harlan spoke, a shift began to take place. His words, filled with hope and direction, sparked something within them. The future was uncertain, but it was a future they could shape together. The tension that had gripped the room slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a flicker of optimism. Change was coming, and for the first time it didn't seem like an impossible task. The room was thick with unease as Harlan watched his team react to the changes he had set in motion. Some of the employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering among themselves. A few looked down their brows, furrowed in apprehension as if the weight of the new expectations was too much to bear. "I don't know if we can keep up with all this," one of them muttered under his breath, the words carrying a heavy doubt. Others, however, seemed invigorated by the challenge. "This could be the change we need," a younger cook said, his voice brimming with optimism. It was clear that not everyone was on the same page. While some saw the future as a beacon of hope, others were afraid of the hard work and dedication it would demand. The division was undeniable, the tension in the room palpable as each person silently weighed their own fears and hopes. The uncertainty of the future loomed large, but it was also a moment of reckoning. Some were ready to face the challenge head-on, while others still clung to the comfort of the status quo. The room had split, and Harlan could feel the weight of the conflict between those who believed in the change and those who feared it. This was the first real test of his vision, and it was clear that the path ahead wouldn't be easy for everyone. The following week, Harlan brought in a food expert to help guide the kitchen through the transition. The expert, a calm and experienced figure, immediately began reviewing the kitchen's process with a sharp eye. The staff gathered around, watching intently as the expert demonstrated new methods of preparation and handling ingredients. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Where there had once been hesitation, there was now a spark of curiosity. The kitchen began to hum with a new rhythm, each staff member working with a renewed sense of purpose. Harlan observed from the corner of the room, his heart swelling with cautious optimism. The changes were beginning to take shape, small but unmistakable. The expert's guidance was exactly what the kitchen needed to break free from its stagnation. Employees asked more questions, engaged in discussions, and for the first time, Harlan saw them take ownership of the improvements. There was still a long way to go, but the shift in energy was undeniable. For the first time, Harlan allowed himself to believe that this could work, that the restaurant could turn itself around. The initial signs of success were tangible, and hope began to take root in a place that had long been defined by its mistakes. As the days passed, Harlan continued to monitor the progress in the kitchen. The employees were slowly adapting to the new procedures, but there were moments when the cracks in their effort became glaringly obvious. One cook, after handling raw meat, absent-mindedly wiped his hands on his apron, leaving streaks of blood and fat that would have been unthinkable under the old standards. Harlan's stomach churned at the sight, and for a brief moment his hope faltered. The changes were real, yes, but the execution was still far from flawless. There was a tension in the air, a persistent reminder that progress came with a cost. The staff were learning, but there was still so much to correct. It was as though they were walking a fine line between success and failure, their hands now guided by the principles Harlan had instilled, but still the old habits lurked in the corners. Harlan stood back, his eyes scanning the room, feeling the weight of both the progress and the shortcomings. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was something. The small steps they had taken felt fragile, like a building erected on an unstable foundation. Yet even in the imperfections there was hope that one day they would get it right. For now, though, Harlan knew that the journey was far from over. There was still work to be done. Harlan decided it was time to take the next step. He wasn't just going to supervise from the sidelines anymore, he needed to be in the trenches with his team. Rolling up his sleeves, he joined the kitchen staff, taking the apron himself, and dove into the process. It was a challenge navigating the newfound systems and working alongside people who were still adjusting to the changes. The pace was slower than usual, and the uncertainty was tangible in the air. Some of the movements felt awkward, the old habits still clinging tightly, but Harlan could see the effort. The staff was pushing themselves, trying their hardest to make the new methods work. The sounds of chopping knives, sizzling pans, and the hum of the kitchen filled the space. But beneath it all, Harlan felt something deeper, a connection. He wasn't just observing, he was part of the team now. Their struggles felt like his, and their small victories felt like his own. There was a shared sense of purpose, a collective energy that hadn't been there before. Harlan wasn't just the boss anymore. He was a colleague working alongside them, showing them that he was just as invested in their success as they were. The small, imperfect steps they were taking didn't feel like failures. They felt like progress. And that's all Harlan needed to see. That evening, after the dinner rush, Harlan joined his team for a shared meal. The kitchen was quiet now, the chaos of the day giving way to the warmth of a simple dinner together. The atmosphere was lighter, more relaxed, and the usual tension that had filled the air before seemed to dissipate. One by one, employees began to share their stories. A server spoke about her struggles as a single mother, a cook revealed how much he appreciated the chance to learn new skills, and another talked about how the recent changes had reignited his passion for the job. Each story was personal, heartfelt, and filled with gratitude. Harlan listened, leaning in, taking it all in. He couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. This connection, this acknowledgement of the hard work was what he had hoped for. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the people, about the spirit of the team. He felt their appreciation, their thanks for not just the improvements in the kitchen, but for his leadership, his willingness to dive in and make things better. As they finished eating and the night wound down, a sense of calm settled over the group. Harlan felt a warmth inside, knowing his efforts were making a real difference. The team had started to come together not just as employees, but as people. A week later, Harlan stood in the kitchen again, this time with a critical eye. The new process for making the Texas chili had been implemented, and he watched closely as the team followed the steps they'd learned. The chili was cooked to perfection, rich, flavorful, the ingredients exactly as they should be. It was a clear sign of progress, and for a moment Harlan allowed himself to relax. But as he stood there watching the kitchen in motion, he noticed the small imperfections, ingredients not measured precisely, the heat slightly too high on one of the burners, a small spill left unchecked. It was nothing catastrophic, but it was enough. The changes were taking root, but they weren't perfect. And Harlan wasn't about to settle for anything less than the best. He called for a meeting, determined to push the team further. "We're getting there," he said, his voice firm but encouraging, "but we're not done yet. We have to keep pushing to make every dish as perfect as it can be." It wasn't criticism, it was motivation, a reminder that improvement was a continuous process. The journey was far from over, and there was more work to be done. Harlan knew this was the moment where the real work began. The team had made strides, but the road to excellence would require their commitment, their patience, and their focus. And Harlan was ready to lead them the rest of the way. In the meeting, Harlan's words were measured, but his message was clear. The changes we've made aren't temporary. They need to be sustained not just in how we prepare food, but in how we approach our work every single day. He said, his eyes sweeping over the room. His gaze lingered on the faces of the team, some of whom still wore skepticism like a shield. I know this hasn't been easy, he continued, but I need you to keep pushing. I need you to keep striving for excellence because that's the only way we're going to get better. The room was quiet, but Harlan could feel the shift. The uncertainty in the air started to dissipate, replaced by something more solid, a sense of determination, a collective push forward. He spoke not only as a boss, but as someone who understood the challenges they faced, someone who had been through the same struggles. And that was why, when he said, "We can do this. I believe in you," it carried weight. For the first time, the skeptical employees felt the flicker of change within themselves, not just in their work, but in their outlook. The encouragement had done its job. Harlan had lit a spark, and now it was up to them to fan the flames. Harlan watched carefully as the kitchen prepared a new dish, one that would test the new methods they'd implemented. As the team began, some hesitated. There was nervous energy in the air, a quiet murmur of uncertainty. A few of the cooks looked at each other, unsure if they were applying the new procedures correctly. Harlan, sensing their hesitation, stepped closer. "Take your time," he reassured them. "It's not going to be perfect right away, but we'll get there. Trust the process, and trust yourselves." His words were calm, but they were a steady reminder of the bigger picture. They were in this together. It was an awkward dance. At first, ingredients were measured hesitantly, the new cooking methods not yet second nature. But Harlan didn't rush them. He understood that real change takes time, and forcing perfection too soon would only bring more anxiety. "Remember," he said softly, "every change is a step forward, even when it doesn't feel like it." The kitchen continued to move, not perfectly, but with more confidence now. The tension, though still present, began to feel less like an obstacle and more like an invitation to keep improving, to keep learning. When the new dish was finally plated, Harlan took a step back to look. The colors were vibrant, the presentation sharp. The scent of the dish, rich and flavorful, filled the air, and as the first bite was tasted, the staff exchanged glances. It was good. Better than good, actually. It was better than Harlan had expected. The ingredients worked together beautifully, and the process, though not perfect, had resulted in a dish worthy of their effort. Harlan smiled, nodding in approval. "This," he said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and encouragement. "This is what we can do when we stick to the plan, when we push ourselves to get better." The staff seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, the pressure they'd been under finally easing, replaced with a quiet confidence. "But remember," Harlan continued, "this is just one dish. Every order has to meet this standard. We can't compromise." The message was clear. The bar had been set, and they were expected to meet it every time. But as Harlan looked around the kitchen, he felt a wave of pride wash over him. This wasn't just a victory in the kitchen, it was a victory for the team, a tangible sign that they were moving in the right direction. The change was real, and it was theirs to own. Weeks passed, and the kitchen began to settle into the rhythm of the new process. What had once felt awkward and forced now became second nature. Employees were no longer just following instructions, they were experimenting, adjusting, and finding their own ways to improve. The creativity that had been stifled by the old rigid systems began to flourish. They started playing with new ingredients, testing combinations they had never considered before. Some dishes were hits, while others missed the mark, but that didn't stop them from trying again. The air in the kitchen shifted, and with it the energy. There was a new sense of ownership, a quiet pride that radiated from the staff as they worked. They weren't just cogs in a machine anymore. They were active participants in the success of the restaurant. Harlan watched from the sidelines, quietly impressed. He had seen the hesitation in their eyes when he first introduced the changes, but now he saw confidence. They were no longer just following a process, they were mastering it, making it their own. It was a quiet, natural transformation, but it was happening, and it was more than Harlan could have hoped for. The team was beginning to find its stride, and the creative spark he had longed for was now igniting the kitchen. Harlan knew that for the changes to be truly effective, they couldn't just stay within one location, they needed to spread. So he made the rounds, visiting other branches to check on the progress. The results were mixed, but there was no denying the improvements. The kitchens were cleaner, the staff more focused, and the quality of the food was undeniably better. Still, it wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt, some areas where old habits crept back in. It was clear that progress would be gradual, but that was to be expected. Harlan had never expected an overnight transformation. The process was going to take time, effort, and, most importantly, patience. What mattered was the direction they were heading in forward. He took note of the issues that remained the areas where the team still struggled and made mental notes to address them. But overall, he was pleased with the progress. He couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching the team take the first steps toward something better, knowing that this was only the beginning. Harlan's satisfaction was tempered with a quiet resolve, though. He knew they were on the right track, but the journey was far from over. When Harlan returned to the original restaurant, he was ready to face whatever reality awaited him. But what he found surprised him. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. The air was lighter, the pace more fluid, and the staff, once hesitant and unsure, were now engaged and confident. They worked together with a purpose, their energy synchronized in a way that hadn't been there before. The food was better, of course, but it was more than that. The attitude had shifted. There was pride in every plate they sent out. Harlan watched a server interact with a customer, smiling and genuinely engaging in conversation. It was a stark contrast to the cold, mechanical service he had seen before. He stood back for a moment, observing it all, and allowed himself to feel a sense of accomplishment. The effort had paid off. The changes were visible not just in the quality of the food, but in the spirit of the team. They were no longer just employees, they were contributors to something larger. For the first time since he had walked through the doors of the restaurant, Harlan felt a quiet pride. The road ahead still had challenges, but for now he knew they were on the right path. The restaurant had started to transform, and so had the people working within it. After weeks of improvements and adjustments, Harlan decided it was time to experience the changes firsthand. One evening, he sat down at the very restaurant he had worked so tirelessly to transform. The moment the dish was placed in front of him, he knew something had shifted. The Texas chili looked exactly how it should: rich, vibrant, and full of depth. The presentation was impeccable, the flavors well-balanced. Even the service had changed. The waitstaff greeted him with genuine smiles, a stark contrast to the indifference that once filled the space. Harlan took his first bite, savoring the robust flavors, and in that moment he allowed himself to feel the satisfaction of seeing his vision come to life. The food was no longer just sustenance. It was a reflection of the hard work, the dedication, and the commitment to quality that had been instilled in every member of the team. There was a quiet pride that welled up inside him. It wasn't just about the food, it was the atmosphere, the energy in the room, the way the staff now approached their work. For the first time, Harlan saw the tangible results of his efforts. He couldn't help but smile to himself, knowing that this restaurant, once riddled with apathy and poor standards, had now become something he could truly be proud of. The changes had worked. The next step was to hear from the people who had made this transformation possible. Harlan began meeting with each member of the staff individually, eager to hear their thoughts on the changes. As he sat down with each person, the conversations were open and honest. Some employees shared their struggles, how difficult it had been to adjust to new methods, how overwhelming the pace had felt at times. But in every conversation, Harlan could hear something else too: determination. There was a new spark in their voices, a sense of pride in the work they were doing. "It's not easy, but it feels right," one of the cooks told him. "I feel like I'm actually learning something that matters." Harlan listened carefully, taking in the feedback and understanding the challenges they faced. But most importantly, he felt the shift in their attitudes. What had once been resignation had now become a quiet confidence. They were beginning to see the results of their hard work, and they were ready to push even further. It was this transformation in spirit that Harlan valued most. This was the change that would make the difference in the long run. Despite the positive changes, there were still concerns lingering beneath the surface. Some of the staff were still hesitant, uncertain about the longevity of the improvements. Harlan noticed it in their eyes, the doubt that flickered when they spoke about the future. "What if this doesn't last?" one of them asked during a break. "What if we can't keep up with these new standards?" The fear was palpable, and Harlan knew it wasn't just about the work, it was about trust. Could they trust that the changes would stick? Would they be able to maintain the high standards they'd set for themselves? It was clear to Harlan that this wasn't just a matter of improving food and service. It was about changing mindsets. And mindsets were harder to change than habits. At the next meeting, he decided to address these concerns head-on. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with unspoken doubts, but Harlan knew he had to confront them. "I understand the concerns." He began, his voice calm but firm. "But this is a journey. We're not done yet, and we'll face challenges together. I believe in this team, and I know we can make this work long-term." It was a tough conversation, one that revealed the deeper struggles of the team, but it was a necessary one, and Harlan knew that addressing the doubts openly was the only way forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but the commitment to the journey was what would see them through. In the meeting that followed, Harlan addressed the room with a calm yet firm resolve. "I hear your concerns." He said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of the changes they were all facing. "This transition isn't easy, and it's not meant to be. But we're in this together, and I'm committed to supporting each and every one of you through this process." His words were direct, but there was a warmth behind them that was impossible to ignore. The room, filled with uncertainty just moments ago, began to settle, the unease lifting slightly. Harlan reassured them that they wouldn't be left behind. He emphasized that long-term support would be provided and that the journey wouldn't end with a single change. It was a process, a commitment to continuously improve step by step. As he spoke, there was a noticeable shift in the room's energy. His commitment to their success made the difference. For the first time, the staff began to feel the reassurance they needed. They weren't just following orders. They were part of something bigger, and Harlan's promise gave them the confidence to believe in the process. This wasn't about temporary change, it was about creating a lasting impact, and for the first time, everyone felt certain that they could face the challenges ahead together. After the meeting, something began to change in the kitchen. The staff, once hesitant and unsure, slowly started to embrace the new expectations. The kitchen, once filled with doubt, now hummed with a different energy. They worked together, discussing ways to improve, sharing tips on how to make the new methods work. Conversations that had once been filled with complaints were now replaced by talks of progress and solutions. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Harlan watched from the sidelines, quietly observing as the team slowly started to move with more confidence. They were no longer just following a checklist, they were owning the process, making it their own. The uncertainty that had plagued them before was replaced by a sense of accomplishment. "We can do this," one of the cooks said, smiling as they plated the first perfect dish of the day. The shift in attitude was palpable, and it wasn't just about the work. The employees now had pride in what they were doing. They were no longer just part of a system, they were an active, creative force in the restaurant's success. Harlan saw it in their eyes, the trust they were beginning to place in themselves and each other. The change wasn't just in the food, it was in the spirit of the team. A month later, Harlan returned to the restaurant for another round of checks. He had seen progress, but now he wanted to see it for himself. How far had they come? As he walked through the kitchen, he could feel it immediately. The chaos that had once marked the air was gone. The staff was moving fluidly, each person playing their part with a sense of purpose. The food that came out of the kitchen was no longer just acceptable, it was exceptional. The Texas chili, once a symbol of their struggles, was now perfectly executed every time. The presentation was immaculate, the flavors on point. Harlan's heart swelled with pride as he watched the dishes being served to the customers, each one a reflection of the hard work and dedication that had gone into the process. The kitchen had transformed into a well-oiled machine, each person contributing with pride and skill. Harlan knew that this wasn't just a victory in terms of the food, it was a victory for the entire team. They had turned a corner and the results were undeniable. The journey wasn't over, but it was clear they had taken the most important steps. Harlan stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the change. The effort, the struggle, the countless hours, it had all been worth it. The transformation was real, and it was just the beginning. Harlan walked into the kitchen, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the difference in the air. The kitchen was alive with energy, and the staff had found a rhythm he had only hoped for. They were no longer just following instructions, they were actively discussing ideas, challenging each other, and thinking creatively about the dishes they served. One cook suggested adding a new twist to the appetizer menu, while another proposed a new way to plate the signature dish. Their faces weren't blank with confusion or hesitation anymore. They were filled with pride and determination. Harlan watched as the team worked together not as individual parts of a machine, but as a cohesive unit with one common goal: improvement. The shift in their attitude was undeniable. They were no longer just employees, they were invested, passionate, and engaged. This transformation was the culmination of everything they had worked for. Harlan realized then that the change had gone beyond just the kitchen, it had reached the very core of the team. What began as a need for better food had grown into something much more significant, a collective spirit of creativity, collaboration, and growth. Harlan couldn't help but smile to himself. The team was evolving in ways he hadn't anticipated, and it filled him with hope for the future. Riding the momentum of the success at the flagship restaurant, Harlan decided it was time to expand the reforms to the other branches. He visited each location, eager to see how the changes had been adopted. The progress was encouraging. At most sites, staff members were starting to apply the new procedures with more confidence, and the atmosphere was noticeably better. But not all branches had adjusted as smoothly. Some teams struggled to integrate the changes consistently. Old habits were hard to break, and the speed of improvement varied from location to location. At one branch, Harlan noticed the staff still seemed hesitant, unsure if they had truly embraced the new methods. The challenges were clear now. Scaling success was never as easy as it appeared on paper. But that wasn't a reason to step back. It was a challenge to tackle. Harlan saw the gaps where the changes hadn't fully taken hold, and he knew that it would take more time, more training, and continued support to make sure the improvements stuck. There was frustration in the process, yes, but also an unwavering resolve. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was simply the beginning of a much larger task, ensuring the success of these changes on a larger scale, one branch at a time. Months had passed since Harlan first began the expansion, and when he returned to check on the progress, the difference was clear. The branches that had once struggled were now steadily improving. The staff were more confident, the kitchen processes smoother, and the quality of the food was more consistent. The changes were no longer just an experiment, they had become part of the fabric of the business. Even more encouraging was the feedback from customers. Reviews were more positive, and repeat customers began to return, appreciating the quality and attention to detail that had become the hallmark of the restaurant. The staff at these locations had adapted, taking ownership of the new processes. They had embraced the challenge, and now they were seeing the results of their hard work. Harlan stood in one of the branches watching as the team worked seamlessly together, the kitchen operating like a well-oiled machine. It wasn't perfect, and there were still hurdles to overcome, but the progress was undeniable. The restaurant was now thriving, not just because of the food, but because of the team behind it. The transformation wasn't just in the business, it was in the people. And Harlan felt a deep sense of pride, knowing that the journey was beginning to bear fruit. The hard work had paid off, but the best was still yet to come. One morning, Harlan opened his mailbox to find a letter that would stop him in his tracks. It was a note of thanks from a customer, simple yet deeply meaningful. The letter praised the Texas chili, calling it life-changing, and said that the experience of eating at the restaurant had completely transformed their view on dining. Harlan's fingers lingered on the paper as the words sunk in. This was more than just a compliment. It was proof that the changes had reached beyond the kitchen, that the hard work he and his team had put in had made a real difference. The feeling of pride swelled in him, but it wasn't just pride for the food. It was pride in the collective effort. This transformation wasn't just about improving dishes. It was about touching lives, creating experiences that lasted longer than the meal itself. For Harlan, it was a reminder that his efforts, despite the struggle and frustration, had paid off in ways he had never fully imagined. The letter wasn't just a thank you, it was a reflection of the ripple effect that his changes had sparked. Harlan stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the impact. The restaurant had become more than just a business, it had become a place where memories were made, and that was the ultimate reward. After reading the letter, Harlan knew it was time to share the story of their journey with the team. During the next meeting, he stood before them not as a boss, but as someone who had walked beside them every step of the way. When we started this journey, we didn't know where it would lead. Harlan began, his voice steady but full of emotion. We faced a lot of challenges, mistakes, setbacks, moments when it felt like nothing was working. But we never gave up, and that's what made all the difference. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. This is what we've accomplished together. He continued, pointing to the kitchen and the staff that had worked tirelessly to make it all happen. We've come so far, and it's because of each and every one of you. His voice grew stronger, more confident. This wasn't just about improving the food. It was about believing in each other, working together, and not backing down from the hard work ahead. Harlan could see the shift in the room. They weren't just employees, they were partners united in the goal of making something better. The energy in the room had changed. It wasn't just about doing the job anymore, it was about pride ownership and the belief that they could continue to improve. The journey had been tough, but together they had made it through. After hearing Harlan's words, a new sense of purpose washed over the team. They didn't just hear the motivation, they felt it deep in their bones. The change wasn't just about better food. It was about a better way of working, a better way of thinking. Each employee, from the cooks to the servers, began applying what they had learned in ways they hadn't before. The processes, once shaky and uncertain, now flowed with purpose. There was a noticeable shift in how the team interacted. Instead of working in isolation, they worked together, constantly looking for ways to improve and support one another. A cook who once hesitated to share an idea now spoke up with suggestions. A server who once kept to themselves was now engaging with customers, sharing the excitement about the changes. This wasn't just a team anymore, it was a collective force. Harlan could see the transformation in every movement, every decision, every conversation. There was no more waiting for instructions. Everyone was taking ownership, working not just for the restaurant's success, but for their own growth as well. The room hummed with energy. They were no longer just employees, they were a united front ready to face any challenge together. The progress was undeniable, and Harlan felt a sense of satisfaction like no other. The change had happened, and it had happened because they had all come together stronger than before. A year had passed, and Harlan stood in the same restaurant that had once been filled with doubt and struggle. Now it hummed with a quiet confidence. The food was better, the service smoother, and the atmosphere completely transformed. As Harlan walked through the kitchen, watching his team work together seamlessly, a deep sense of pride washed over him. The challenges had been great, and there were still obstacles to overcome, but the growth was undeniable. The journey had not just changed the restaurant, it had changed the people. Employees who had once been uncertain and hesitant now walked with their heads held high. Their confidence wasn't just in their work, but in themselves. Harlan could see it in their eyes. The improvements were not just in the process, but in the very spirit of the team. He thought back to when he first walked into the kitchen, the tension, the mistrust. Now they were a united force. The change had not only elevated the restaurant, but had transformed their lives. It was a success not just in business, but in personal growth. And as Harlan took it all in, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The path had been long, but every step had been worth it. Despite the success they had achieved, Harlan knew this was only the beginning. Standing before his team, he shared his vision for the future, one that extended far beyond the walls of this restaurant. "We've done something remarkable here," he said, his voice full of conviction. but I don't want us to stop. This is just one step in a journey that continues to grow." He spoke about his plans to expand the changes to other areas, other projects, ways they could apply what they had learned to continue improving. We have to keep learning, keep adapting, and keep pushing for more. The journey isn't over yet. His words were more than just motivation. They were a challenge, a call to action. Harlan wasn't content with the progress they had made so far. He was looking ahead. And as he looked around at the team that had transformed with him, he could feel the energy shift. There was a shared excitement in the room, a collective belief that the best was yet to come. They were ready to take on whatever came next, and for the first time Harlan felt confident they could do it together. Looking back, Harlan saw the long road they had traveled filled with setbacks, doubts, and frustrations. Yet here they were, stronger, more united, and better than ever. The restaurant had transformed, but more importantly, so had the team. Harlan could feel the weight of what they had achieved, and for the first time he understood the power of persistence. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The future was theirs to shape, and he had no doubt that they were ready. The challenges ahead were vast, but with this team, nothing seemed impossible. The journey had only just begun.